Coming up, everything you wanted to know and experiences from Pop Century. Welcome to the SeeWDW Near and Far podcast, where we explore perspectives of the Walt Disney World Resort from 10 to 1,000 miles away. I am Mike the Far in this equation. John, you're muted.
Oh, sorry, I'm John the Deer.
All right. All right. So we are going to discuss both of our one of our favorite resorts, right? Would you call it your favorite, or would it be at least in your top three, right, John?
I don't know. It varies. It could be my favorite when you add in nostalgia and family vacations and things like that. But honestly, if you say, all right, do you want to stay at Pop Century or Animal Kingdom Lodge? I'm probably going to go with Animal Kingdom Lodge. But I do love Pop Century, though.
I totally understand it. It is my wife's favorite resort. It is probably up there in the top three for me, but yeah, I agree. All right, so Pop Century was created as Walt Disney's fourth value resort, and it was the first one outside of the All-Star area branding. And by first one, I mean first value resort outside of All-Star. The resort themed around the decades of the mid to later part of the 20th century, originally opening in 2003. Pop Century was originally intended to be themed with two sides using a decade concept spanning the entire 10 decades of the 20th century. This concept was eventually scaled back and became two separate resorts, Pop Century and Art of Animation. So here we go. The original concept and development of the resort began in the 1990s. The original team behind that development was led by Imagineers, including Joe Rohde, who seems to be doing everything at around this period of time, right, John? I mean, everything. He was the lead designer of the resort. Kim Irvine, who is also someone who was really heavily involved in that era, was the art director of the resort. Kevin Rafferty was the show director of the resort, and Brian Piasecki, who was the project manager of the resort. The team was inspired by the idea of creating a resort that would celebrate the 20th century through the lens of American pop culture. They wanted to create a resort that would be fun, whimsical, and nostalgic for guests of all ages. This team worked closely with Disney historians to research the different decades that would be represented at the resort. They also worked with artists and designers to create the unique theming for each building. Pop Century was a groundbreaking resort when it was opened in 2003, as it was the first resort to be themed towards the 20th century American pop culture. It set a new standard for value price resorts at Walt Disney World. Now, the original concept was centered around each decade. It was to have 10 sections, each themed to a different decade from the 20th century. One side would be the first half of the century, the 1900s to the 1940s, and this would be called the legendary years. While the second half of the century, 1950s to 1990s, eventually was known as the classic years. And actually early on, this was called, in the classic years section, it was called the decades. So eventually they had to change that, and we'll get into that a little bit here in just a minute. But what were you going to say, John?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, this is one of the first resorts that I remember them planning. I remember hearing about it ahead of time, and I think it was probably because of the timing of it. The internet was starting to be more popular.
Hmm.
You could actually get information, and I remember hearing about this one, and I think Coronado Springs too. I remember hearing about the new Disney resorts coming, and that they're working on and planning, and I was very excited. But I did want to mention, I think one of the reasons that I like this resort so much is it's not focused on just your favorite Disney films. Like
Hmm.
there's stuff around. There's the Jungle Book stuff is mixed in, things like that, and but it's not just that. And Disney, they're not good at doing that anymore. It's like, is it
Yeah.
Frozen or Moana? It's like, what's this resort going to be? It's like, well, how about something no one thought of? The decades from the 50s through the 2000s. It's like, that it just, I don't think it would happen today, and I think that's one of the reasons I liked it so much. Plus, it's the first Disney resort that I heard about before I ever stayed there. So when we made our plans, I was like, I know where I want to try the new value resort, brand new. So I was very excited to try it out.
Yep, I totally agree. And that's a great point because this did come at a period of time, at least the development and everything started at a period of time where you were starting to see rumors. I mean, you had sites like, let's say Intercot at the
Right.
time, right? That would give you information. And of course the market's flooded now, but at that point in time, they were one that really sticks in my mind that they were around, and they were passing along information as they got it. I remember, do you remember Dixie Landings, which eventually became, uh, um, like
Riverside,
Riverside, and also, eventually Port Orleans. What's the other one
French
called?
Quarter.
French Quarter. So Port Orleans itself, I remember seeing a lot of rumors around that at the time when that was starting where they were starting to change it into Port Orleans. So yeah, I just remember a lot of that stuff too, and that's a great point. It kind of escaped my mind that this did come around that era. Um, and you heard a lot of rumors around development. So yeah, great point, John. I didn't even think of that. But so each decade would be represented by a different building, and the buildings would be located on opposite sides of the lake. A bridge called the Generation Gap Bridge would connect the two halves of the resort. The following are the 10 decades that were originally planned for Disney's Pop Century: 1900s, the 1910s, which was called the Flappers and Flapperdom. The 1920s was called the Jazz Age. The 1930s was the Great Depression. The 1940s, World War II. 1950s, Rockabilly and Space Age. 60s was Flower, Power, and Mod. The 70s was disco and funk, the 80s MTV and new wave, and 1990s hip hop and grunge. And as you can tell, they themed these decades around music at the time. So this eventually really changed into something a little different. It would evolve.
Well, I have to say too, I would have loved to have seen what it looked like originally if they would have followed through. And I always heard that after 9/11, it
Mm-hmm.
slowed down to the point that they decided to not work on that side anymore. And so I heard that's kind of what delayed it. But I can say, if you could pick a side, I mean, do you want to stay in the Great Depression wing? It's like, nah, I think I'll take the 70s, disco or 80s black
Absolutely.
band or something like
Yeah.
that. I'm sure it would have been great. Like they would have found a way. It probably would have been like I don't know what they did back then, like hula hoops or something.
Yeah.
They would have found the positive in it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it would have been cool if they would have done that in like a black and white motif, rather than color because of the era and everything. And I mean, maybe they were going to do that eventually, but it's funny you mentioned September 11th because those events really had a significant impact on the development of the resort. As you remember, and most people know this, the tourism and travel industry faced major disruptions and uncertainties due to the attacks. And this ultimately, as you said, John, led to changes in plans for the resort. Unfortunately, the legendary years section was put on hold indefinitely, and the resort's developers after that decided to just scale back the whole project and concentrate solely on what became known as the classic years. This concept, of course, focused on the latter half of the 20th century. Now, this change in plans allowed Disney to streamline the development process and adapt to the challenges posed by the post 9/11 environment. And while the legendary years concept was abandoned, the classic years theme, which centered around the 50s through the 90s, allowed for the resort to proceed forward. In summary, the events of September 11th led to a reassessment of the original plans and played a role in shaping its final design and theme. So you're absolutely right, John. Unfortunately, those plans went away, and eventually that part of it became, art of animation. So,
Yeah, and I can tell you from staying there many times that during that time period, like all of my official stays were there, um, pre Skyliner, and back before art of animation was happening at all. I used to see a lot of activity over there. Like we would look across and we take pictures. We'd be like, "Wow, it's like abandoned buildings," and I thought it was fun to see it. But I remember buses would be there all the time, and I was told that they would train bus drivers back there. It was the perfect spot because they had the parking lot part was already done, so they go there. There's no guests, there's no workers. It's a great place to test and or train bus drivers, and
hmm.
I've never read it officially, but I'm pretty sure that's what they were doing because I would see Disney buses over there, unless
Oh.
they were doing after hours drag racing or something. I don't think that's the case. I'm pretty sure it was an official capacity.
You never know. I mean, they did have a NASCAR, or not a NASCAR, but a what was it? One of the an IndyCar race there at
Oh
one
yeah,
time.
Tom
So
Petty. Yeah, I remember that was there too. One of my earlier marathons, we went out onto that track and did a circle on the track, and they brought the cars out all over and stuff, and that was pretty cool. It's probably my 2009. That was my first one, so it's probably around there somewhere. But
very, very cool. I would have loved to see that at that time. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I'm not into that stuff now, but at one time I was, especially back then, I think. So, um, interesting stuff about the legendary years. That section, they were going to use it to pay homage to the cultural, technological, and social milestones from those decades. The architecture, decor, and atmosphere were meant to transport guests back in time to experience the nostalgia of the early part of the century. Um, Obviously, there were the factors involved with September 11th, but one other factor that they ran into was finding people to help them theme the resort. They really had a tough time gaining historical accuracy that they really wanted for the legendary years. And Joe Rohde probably was really the stickler here for
yeah,
this.
he's so thorough that he probably was like, without a time machine, this is not going to meet what I have in my head.
Yes.
It's not going to be enough. And yeah, luckily the 50s through the 90s there was enough around to.
Yes.
It was close enough, but the others, yeah, that was probably going to be
Yeah,
difficult.
you figure those Imagineers all lived through the later half of the century, so they knew. I mean, they were somewhat experts on that era. So, the execution of a resort section that accurately captured the essence of those decades was complex and posed difficulty in maintaining a cohesive guest experience. So ultimately, with the financial part of it, 9/11, and really trying to create a cohesive environment that kept those decades relevant to guests, that really led to the abandonment of the concept. The legendary years eventually went away, and what we got were the classic years. And the concept of the classic years that they ultimately went with was the 50s through the 90s. And under this concept, each building within the resort represented a different decade. They were designed to capture the pop culture trends and icons of those of that era, each individual era. And that included the architecture, the decor, and the larger than life elements that pay homage to the significant cultural and historical milestones of each of those decades. The guests are brought into a nostalgic journey through time with iconic symbols such as jukeboxes, hippie flowers, Rubik's cubes, and other symbols evoking memories from the past. This theme allows guests to relive or learn about the cultural evolution of the second half of the 20th century, making it a unique and engaging experience for visitors of all eras. This concept offers a blend of nostalgia and modern amenities, giving guests the opportunity to connect with the past while enjoying conveniences of the present. Now, what I would say, John, is it probably ended up working out for the better because these decades are fresher in our collective cultural consciousness. And I think it allowed. So, for example, we had parents that grew up during the earlier parts of these decades, and we probably saw a lot of stuff around our house or on TV or what have you, or heard stories from these people that we grew up with, and we pass it on, right?
I was born in the 70s, so I got 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yeah.
So I got the bulk of it. And I was going to say, the pictures that I have up are from around Christmas time. And I can tell you that I had that Santa Claus on my Christmas tree, and I had these creepy elves around
Yeah,
there too.
I had some too. That's great. I had some of those creepy elves too. In fact, I still have some. And my wife always says, "There's your grandmother's creepy elf." Oh, that's great. I actually love.
I thought that was good.
Yeah, I love that Christmas tree hip hop century every year because, man, the nostalgia is strong on that one.
Yeah, I feel like that too. It's not the most decorated resort for Christmas, but it has the biggest connection with the most people probably because again, you can go to the yacht club and you're going to get boats and sailboats and nautical, and it's like unless you grew up, beachfront on a yacht or something, it's probably not a connection. But this stuff is connection to, like I said, the largest variety of people probably.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And again, it's part of our cultural kind of touchstone, at this point. Uh, Eventually, when the original concept was abandoned and they actually termed this the classic years and they went with this theme, which was about 2010, they did what they coined a grand reopening. And basically, all that was a retheming and a renewed focus on where they were going with the resort. And with that, and I'm glad you're showing the one of the icons here. Let's talk a little bit about the grand features and some of the things that are in the resort. Some of the icons and things. First of all, the grand reopening ushered in the themed buildings, like a renewed focus on the theming of the buildings. They renewed the commitment to nostalgic decor and the iconic memorabilia, the theming of the pools, everything. They just put a renewed focus on those things. But I really love the iconography around each one of these buildings. So the 1950s, you have giant bowling pins. You have classic cars. The oversized replica of cars from the 50s paying homage to the era's automobile culture. And you have the Lady and the Tramp statue, which is a tribute to the popular Disney movie released during this decade.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt you, but one of my favorites is the giant big wheel, because man, I love my
we're
big
getting
wheel.
we're getting there in the 70s, that's for sure. I love that big wheel too, because I had one of those. In the 60s, we have the hippie flowers. They're emulating the flower power and peace movements of the 60s. You have yo-yo and hippie icons like a giant yo-yo and other symbols reflecting the whimsy and counterculture of the era, and a Baloo statue honoring the release of Disney's The Jungle Book. Also, the pool is called the Hippy Dippy Pool that these icons are around, and there is the Baloo and Jungle Book, and this is poolside of the Hippy Dippy Pool on the 60s side of that. And now the 70s, which you were talking about, John, you have big foosball players representing the rise of foosball as a popular game during the 70s. You have 8-track tapes, oversized 8-track tape replicas symbolizing the era's music and technology, and the big wheel, an iconic symbol of childhood during this decade. And as you said, definitely something that evokes a lot of memories for children of the 70s.
Yeah, and I have to say too, I know it's corny, and it's probably out of fashion drastically at Disney right now. Now they want minimalist. Is this the Hampton Inn? Is it the Hilton? Oh wait, I see a character. It must be Disney. It's like that's where they're at now. There is no mistake where you are when you're staying at Pop Century. And I have to say, for kids too, they are never going to forget gigantic big wheels and Baloos and Roger Rabbits and larger than life, colorful things. The Mickey phone, just a 3-story Mickey phone. It's like, you will not forget that. In contrast, your kids, when they grow up, they won't be like, I want to stay in the new Grand Floridian rooms. I remember them as a kid. They looked very much like every other room, but there was a Mickey hidden in the lamppost. It's like, nope, they're not going to remember it. They're going to be like, man, what else you got? But my daughter's in her 20s, and I guarantee when she sees all this stuff, probably she was not alive in the 70s. I guarantee it would make her smile, remember her childhood, all these giant, colorful things. And I haven't asked her, but I'd be willing to bet she thinks it's pretty awesome.
I mean, she might think that staying at the Grand Floridian reminds her of Grandma's house, I mean, because that's what it kind of reminds me of.
Not anymore. Now it reminds you
of a Hilton or something.
Yeah, the new updated Marriott. It's nice. That's my opinion, at least. Like I said, when I stay at Disney, I want to stay somewhere that feels like
Disney.
Yeah. And that's why I love the Animal Kingdom Lodge too. I'm like,
yeah,
they did such a great job that it's just where you are.
Well, it goes back to that thing that you mentioned quite a bit though, and that's weird Disney, like that weird feel that Disney used to give everyone, right? I mean, that strange feeling of different, of being transported to a different world. They overuse the term immersion nowadays, but I mean, that's basically what they were doing at the time, was taking you to a different world, that was strange, different than what you were used to.
I just feel like the current management doesn't understand the importance of all that. And I
They
know
don't. Yeah.
I haven't listened to his last few most recent things, but I always love to hear what's his name, Braden from Mickey
Mickey
Views.
views. Yeah.
He would always talk about untheming. He's like the untheming of this, the untheming of that, and I'm like, that is a great term to apply to it because that seems to be the direction they're going. And when you untheme something and change it to, you get extra magic in the morning for 30 minutes. I'm like, ooh, that's like, I start thinking, what other hotels are in the area? Is there anything cooler? So I think that that is a big problem for them, the untheming part. I don't think it's going to work out great in the long term. I'm no expert, but like I said, for me, the theming is what made me love Pop Century. And I really liked the food court. The arcade was awesome, all that stuff.
I completely agree. I think it's great. I mean, it reminds me a lot. Wouldn't you have loved when you were, under 10 years old or up to 10 years old to stay in a place like Pop Century,
Yep. Yep. And I have to say, here's a memory. My daughter was very young when we would stay there, like, between probably 5 and 10 years old, most of the stays there. And they had a prize based arcade at that time, which they've since gotten rid of. But you got tickets, whatever you played, tickets popped out. And I remember
Hmm.
we would get the stuffed animals. It would be like a miniature Chuck E. Cheese thing. And I remember the one time her grandfather was there, and we got the green army men with the parachute, and they went up onto the third floor and threw it out by the pool, and it's parachuting down, and it was fun in the arcade to get the tickets to get the green army man, and then it was fun later to play outside at night by the pool and throwing it off the thing, and just little stuff like that. It was very special. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, like I said, they don't do that anymore with the tickets. That makes it a little less cool to me. The food court is not quite as good as it used to be, and that makes it a little less good for me. But overall, it's still, I really do like it.
I agree. I will say that prize box type thing, like they don't do the tickets like the Chuck E. Cheese type thing anymore, but they do have a scavenger hunt that they will hand out a thing and allow kids, to pick out prizes very similar to what that was like. So I think there might have even been a parachute army man in there in the prize box. So but basically, they just have them go through and find the things that we're talking about right now. The statues and identify where they're at. So, um, all right, back to these icons in the 1980s. They have a Rubik's Cube, a giant Rubik's Cube, paying tribute to the 80s puzzle craze. Cassette tapes, oversized cassette tape decorations reflecting the era's music culture. Roger Rabbit statue commemorating the success of the Disney movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit. In the 90s, they have a nod to the rise of technology and the internet during the 90s, which is a giant laptop. That's actually at their poll right there. It is, yeah, and that's the end of the 90s poll. They have cell phone icons, oversized cell phone replicas highlighting the new mobile phone revolution from the 90s. And they have a Buzz Lightyear statue celebrating Pixar's Toy Story during this era. Um,
Yeah, that's one that I didn't get for some reason.
Yeah, I don't have that either. And I was looking through my research here, and I'm not
Are you?
sure if I'm pretty sure it's not Buzz Lightyear. That's wrong. This is, so it's not Buzz Lightyear. It is a Sony Walkman type thing. And right there you have it for the 90s, it's a Sony Walkman.
I was gonna say, I think Buzz is at one of the All Stars, right?
He is at one of the All
And
Stars,
I have
yes.
never gone there, so I don't have it. And I am such a
It's All
picture
Star
taker.
Movies. All Star
Yeah,
Movies where it's
I'm
at.
such a picture taker that if it was there, I'm like, I would have seen that, you know. So at first I was like Buzz Lightyear, and I'm like, wait a minute.
Always remember when you do research on using AI, it's
Yeah,
gonna get
AI
you
can help
somewhere
you,
along the
but
way.
it always, yeah, it always throws in curveballs too. So
Yeah, and it's always got some random stupid thing like this just buried in the whole thing. And as I was blindly reading through it, I was even looking at it strange, like what?
yeah,
So there is a point, and maybe you remember, but I think I'm not sure where it's at. There is a Mickey statue or a Mickey telephone statue as well somewhere in the
yeah, and I
resort.
don't in this particular batch, I don't
I
seem
think
to
it's the
have it
70s.
here.
I think it's
It's
across from the big wheel in the 70s.
it is. I don't think I have it here, but it is across from the big wheel.
Yeah, so
But yeah,
that's interesting
I don't appear
because
to. Again, I was going to say I've got hundreds of sets of pictures and videos from here, but you know, I tried to minimize it to one set, so I'm not scrolling all the time. But I've stayed at the building with Mickey's
so have
telephone
I.
there. So.
Yeah, me too. Me too. All right. So each themed area is meticulously crafted to bring guests into the sights and symbols of the corresponding decade, from pop culture icons to technological innovations. These features serve as reminders of the trends and memories that made each of these eras unique. The resort provides a nostalgic and fun-filled experience, allowing guests to connect with their own memories or explore the cultural influences that shaped previous generations. All right, so the room decor nowadays has changed a little bit since you stayed there, John. They've actually rethemed the rooms a little bit. Now I don't remember what they were like. I stayed there before they were rethemed, but I don't remember what they were like back then. But now they're pretty much that generic Disney value resort look. So they have like hardwood type style floors. They have laminate down
Yeah,
and hardwood styles with like generic kind of Mickey pictures behind the bed. So
yeah.
they're
That
nice, they're comfortable, and they've redone the beds and they put Murphy beds in here and there and things
well,
like that.
what
But
I noticed, and I've only been there once or twice since it was redone, but I feel like the inside of the rooms no longer reflects the era, you know,
yes.
necessarily. And when I stayed there, it was carpeted
Hmm.
and very standard. It was your standard hotel room, like anywhere else. You know, it wasn't modernized at all. But I actually have one. I bought it from the cast store. Each of the rooms had a big frame poster inside from the decade you were staying in, and I have a '70s
Wow,
hanging
I
up
don't
here.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a '70s one right here that has all the different things from the set '70s. I should have took a picture of it to show you, but it's hanging on the wall back there, and it's all '70s stuff. And again, that would be in there, and depending on the time of the decade you were in, the artwork in there too. It'd be something simple, but it would be fitting, you know. And now
Hmm.
I feel like you open the door and you're like, nice hotel room. It's like, but not really that themed anymore. That's my thought.
I agree. All the theming was reserved for outside of the resort rooms, I think. But um, I obviously, and it was 2019 or 2017 that they finished the complete renovations of the rooms. They're all pretty much the same at this point. You will find some rooms in the what they call, I forget what I think they call them preferred, right? And some of the preferred rooms they'll have king beds, or a king bed. And again, there's different configurations in the rooms as far as beds go, but other than that, they're pretty much all the same. The resort does not have any family suites like you may find at some of the all-star resorts or over at Art of Animation. But they do have connecting rooms. And oftentimes, believe it or not, John, and this is just a little tip for some people, it's sometimes cheaper to get two connecting rooms at Disney than it is to get those family suites that they sell, which are basically the same thing, two connecting rooms. The difference being family suites have one bathroom and connecting rooms, you have two bathrooms. So if you have a family that size, just get the connecting room, kick the door open, save about $200 to $300 sometimes, and you have two bathrooms. So
Yeah, I agree. That's probably very smart. I never had to do that, but yeah, if I did need had like five or more people, I would probably just go with the connecting rooms
oh
too.
yeah. And interestingly enough, it's the same deal at Universal with their family suites. It's cheaper to get, depending on where you're staying, to get two connecting rooms and have two bathrooms. The difference with Universal suites, though, is they kind of give you a kitchenette, so that's kind of nice. But I would say, in 2019 is when they added the Skyliner, so that was another new feature. So since they opened it, they really haven't done a lot of new and innovative things with the resort because they haven't really needed to. But a total refurb of the resort itself and the Skyliner, those are pretty big changes to that resort. Probably bigger than what most other resorts, particularly the Skyliner, bigger than what the other resorts experienced. All right. So, as far as how Pop Century has influenced other resorts and hotels, well, there's another resort across town called the Cabana Bay Beach Resort, which also took a retro theming. And I wonder if they didn't take some notes from Pop Century before they created this resort, because Cabana Bay is definitely a retro style resort. And you don't see that too often. There's also a big trend in some other hotels, places in New York City and some other places around the country that use retro theming. In Vegas, you'll find it sometimes. And this isn't an old trend. This happened, a lot of this happened after Pop Century. So I'm not saying that Pop Century had a direct influence. Maybe it's more as far as like the culture wanting to eat up retro things, but Pop Century was definitely ahead of the curve on this. As far as Cabana Bay Resort, I really love Cabana Bay over at Universal, but it definitely takes some notes here from Pop Century. That's pretty much where I went with my research, John. Is there any? I know there's plenty we can talk about with Pop Century. We've even done a previous episode on Pop Century as far as just talking about the resort itself. It's got great pools. Aren't the pools
Yeah.
heated? Are the pools
Oh
heated,
yeah,
John?
they are. They are. I've been there in the winter many times, and here you can see the main hippy dippy pool. Well,
Mm-hmm.
guess you can't see it too well because Amazon. But and they have the computer pool, and they have I think a guitar or no? Is it a? It's a piano pool or
I think
no?
it's piano. I think it was piano pool. There is a piano pool on site somewhere, but I'm not sure
I
exactly
keep
where it's at.
yeah. When I say that, I'm like, wait a minute, that's got to be All Star Music, and I'm like, but I'm pretty sure there's an instrument pool here, and I think it may be a piano of some kind. I just don't. I think it's in like the 50s and 60s area. They have a pool,
Yeah,
but
the 50s and 60s era is the hippy dippy pool. I think it may be the 70s pool that you're thinking of. And
I'm
I'm not sure if it's piano. I think it might be. Um, but let me
pretty
look it
sure
up.
it is because I've never been to the other one, and I've been on the piano. But
Yeah,
I
and the
did want
Hippy
to.
Dippy pool's right outside what they call the Classic Hall, which is where the all the restaurants and or the restaurant and the store is and everything. It's the bowling pool. It's bowling,
That's
and it
what it is.
is.
Bowling. Yep.
And it does, you're right, it does, it is in the 1950s, which is kind of strange because part of the 1950s borders the Hippy Dippy pool. Or no, it doesn't. I guess that's the 60s then, wouldn't it be? At
Yeah,
the
I guess
Hippy.
it's the '60s, then the '70s on the other side, on the left side as you walk out. But I was going to say these are nice pools, but there's no water slides, so they're
Yeah.
fairly simplified pools. But the water was always warm, and when I used to vacation here, they didn't have the rule yet for these gates around the pool. So the pool was just wide open, which was great because no matter where you went, you just walked towards the pool when you went out. Now you got to find a gate to get through, and
Right.
I'm sure that's for safety, but it was kind
Yeah,
of cool not having that for all those years when I would vacation.
I agree. The 90s pool is the computer pool.
Yeah.
That's the buildings at the far end of the resort. The 70s and 90s. I say 90s, but it's 80s and 90s together. The 70s doesn't have a pool. It just has like a foosball kind of soccer field in the middle of it. And the Hippy Dippy pool is over in the 60s area, and that is right in the center of the resort. The 50s era is what you were talking about. That's the bowling pool, and it's in the shape of a bowling pin. So that is over there.
Yeah, and I did want to mention too that again, I used to like the food court more because it had more unique offerings, but still a great food court because unlike a lot of the deluxe resorts and things like that, they would have a pizza pasta, they would have burgers and fries, they'd have chicken, they'd have something else special. Like they really give you a lot of options. So you go in and there are I think four different places to eat. And again, I think Cabana Bay is like that too. Lots of offerings. So again, Cabana
Yeah.
Bay kind of mimicked that a little bit. But when I would stay here, though, it was great because I would get to try something different. And I always say, they used to make custom salads here, and the Asian noodle salad it was chicken Asian noodle salad was so darn good that I would dream about it when I would not be on vacation. And when we didn't stay at Pop, we literally already drove there just so I could get this salad. It was fresh made right in front of it. They take the ingredients, put it, sesame seeds, a sauce, and it would be delicious. And one day they just stopped doing that, and I'm like,
Huh.
I was so disappointed. But what are you gonna do? Nothing lasts forever.
Yeah. And just to add real quick, as I'm actually looking at the resort now, the 50s section has a jukebox as an icon and it has both main characters from Lady and the Tramp as their statue characters, and of course the 60s has Baloo and a Play-Doh thing, and it also has the big pop sign that you often have in your videos when you do a Pop Century thing. And the 70s has the big wheel and the Mickey, and the 90s has Roger Rabbit. Well, that's the 80s has Roger Rabbit, and right across from the 80s, the 90s has the computer, has the laptop. The Walkman is actually part of the 80s. So how they did it, John, is the 50s actually has 3 buildings. The 60s has 2 buildings. The 70s has 2 buildings. The 80s has 2 buildings, and the 90s have 1 building, with obviously the 50s 3 buildings being in one end of the resort and the 80s, 90s being at the other end of the resort. So
Yeah, I was gonna say this was never there when I vacationed. So, um, and this is from 2021. I don't even know if they do that now, but Groovy Campfire complimentary marshmallows. That's something they do at the deluxe resorts. So I don't know. That's they're getting fancy down there if they're still doing it.
Well, last time I stayed, they did not have a campfire type thing per se, but a lot of the resorts are still doing that. But now they're charging you for
Mm.
the s'mores the marshmallow kits. The other thing I will say is they're doing movies right there on your picture where you have Goofy and the surfboard.
Yep.
There is behind that like a or off to the one side of it somewhere nearby there's a yard that they do movies, and they just do like a blow up kind of movie screen thing, and they'll shoot a Disney movie on there, and it gets quite crowded in that yard, believe it or not. I think it's right there, but maybe behind that sign right there that you're showing.
Yeah. See, it even says by Building
By
5
this, there it is.
near
Yep.
movie lawn. So there's a movie lawn.
Movie lawn. So the movie lawn is where they used to do that, and they do have a movie every night. And again, it really collects a crowd, and more so in that resort than any resort I've seen. And they all do movie nights now.
I think it's just because of how many people stay there compared to the other resorts. Like it's just a lot more densely populated. But yeah. Under the movie Under the Stars at 7:30, but this was in December. I don't know.
Well, I will also say that they do other activities there at resorts too, like a tie-dye shirt. They do a tie-dye shirt there, and they do a tie-dye shirt over at Art of Animation too. So,
yeah, and if you're ever there at Christmas, they have a traditional Christmas meal too.
wow, I didn't know that. Isn't that neat?
This is a few years old. It's probably twice as much now, but
Or if they even do it anymore,
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Christmas meal. They might not. They've moved on to other odd religions that don't have anything to do with Christmas, but
Yep. And again, a big perk to this now is the Skyliner. Obviously, the Skyliner has really been a big addition to this. One thing we didn't mention that the resort does sit on a lake, Hourglass Lake is what they call it. And there is a full walking and jogging trail that stretches around Hourglass Lake. It is a little bit over a full mile, I believe. I've actually jogged that particular path, and it's really a smooth path. It's nice. You get a nice breeze off of the lake, just a nice environment at night or in early morning. You can hear the different lizards and frogs along the lake, and occasionally I guess there's a gator in there, so you got to watch that. But they have really nice landscaping there as well. Well maintained flower beds and things like that. So
yeah, so I guess in summary, I still like the Pop a lot, and I loved the Pop even before the Skyliner. But I have to say though, one of the reasons I loved it before the Skyliner though too was I stayed at a large variety of hotels. I would stay at the Pop mostly, and then I would branch out and say, all right, we're going to stay at a moderate, we're going to stay at a deluxe. Like the Wilderness Lodge a couple times went on sale for like $199 a night, and I was like,
wow,
we can do that. I was like, book it, So we changed from Pop to that. But I have to say, the bus service was better at the Pop than the deluxe.
it is
moderate, much better. Yeah. And I love that there was only one stop, because think of all that driving and stopping you do everywhere else. So I know with the Skyliner, it's not quite as good as it used to be, but I have never waited less time for a bus than when I stayed at Pop. So
I agree. And let me just say, as far as planning goes and master planning of a resort, I don't understand what is so difficult about making convenient bus service around your resort. Pop Century is one of the largest resorts on property, yet they have one bus stop. Okay, unlike these other larger resorts that the Caribbean and like Riverside, like the Port Orleans resorts,
Yeah, they're the worst to wait
they're
for.
terrible as far as bus service. Probably Old Key West is one of the worst as far as bus services go. And I really like Old Key West a lot. Don't get me wrong. I like that resort. But Pop Century just has it going on as far as the buses go. Now they have the Skyliner to add to that. So I would agree, John. I still love Pop Century. I've stayed at the deluxe. Some of the deluxes I've stayed at the moderates. Pop Century for your money, I think, is pretty unbeatable.
And you'll definitely know where you are.
Yep, that's for sure. You can't miss it.
You won't be like, wait a minute, here's a 3-story yo-yo. What is that?
Sure.
I know right where I am. There's only one place that there's a 3-story yo-yo.
Yep, that's for sure.
Every day.
Yep, whether it's well, whether it's a yo-yo or whether it's bowling pins, you're not going to miss that you're staying at Pop Century.
Yes.
All right, John, where can they find you online?
Find me at SeeWDW on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and YouTube, and C.UO on Instagram and Facebook.
All right, and you can find me at the Giant Rad, THEE Giant Rad on all the socials. And that should do it for this one. See you on the next one.